Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul O'Neill, and on behalf of Kingston's Buried Treasures, I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's presentation in our monthly lecture series. And tonight is really a very special evening because tonight we are taking the opportunity to celebrate two individuals from our community that really don't get the recognition that they deserve. Our subject for tonight's presentation is Christopher Tappen, Kingston's unsung hero. And that title really could apply just as aptly to our presenter tonight, Ulster County Clerk Nina Postupack. Both of these individuals really are unsung heroes in our community. As you'll learn tonight in our presentation, Christopher Tappen really played an integral role in saving and preserving our historical records during the Revolutionary War. And Nina, on the other hand, has made these records available to us. And in order to really appreciate our historic legacy, you need both of these. You need preservation and you need exhibition. So it's most appropriate that we honor our former Ulster County Clerk, Christopher Tappen, through our present Ulster County Clerk, Nina Postupack. So it is truly an honor to be able to introduce tonight our featured presenter, Nina Postupack.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. I would like to thank everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be part of the Buried Treasure Lecture Series. It's such a wonderful resource to bring people together, have all varied interests to speak about something that we all have in common, and that's the love of history. So the topic of tonight's lecture, as Paul said, will be Christopher Tappen. He was a member of the Ulster County Clerk's office, and through his valiant efforts and valuable records, when Kingston was burned, was saved because of him. However, that is just one of his many contributions to Ulster County, so we'll learn quite a bit about him this evening. As we begin this evening, I'd like to go over a brief outline with you so that you can follow along as we discover more about Christopher Tappen and his amazing contributions to Kingston and Ulster County. First, we'll start by looking at Christopher's birth and his parents, Petrus and Chauci Tappen. And I'll explain that name in a few minutes, where that comes from. Next, we'll move on to Christopher's marriage to Anne Winecoop and the 9 children they would have. Finally, I'll talk about his various public offices, such as Deputy Ulster County Clerk, County Treasurer, New York State Assemblyman, New York State Senator, and Ulster County Clerk. In addition, we'll be highlighting the important role he played in saving early colonial records, such as the Dutch records during the burning of Kingston. So let's talk a little bit about Christopher's early life. He was born in June 1742 in Kingston, New York. He was baptized in the Old Dutch Church in Kingston on June 13th of that very same year. Christopher was named after his grandfather and his older brother, who died in infancy. Christopher was a surveyor by trade. In the years leading up to and following the American Revolution, many founding fathers were land surveyors. There was new land opening up for settlement, and someone needed to survey this new land and fix the boundaries. To become a surveyor, you did not need any formal education. Often you may read 1 or 2 standard textbooks, but you would get your practice by working with an established land surveyor. Since at this time all the land belonged to the king, whenever someone applied for a patent of land where there weren't any settlers, a surveyor would be dispatched so that the individual would know the exact bounds of the patent and the king wouldn't be giving away too much land or too little land. So this is how Christopher Tappen began his early life. He was the 4th child of 6 children born to Petrus and Chauci Tappen. Now, Chauci is spelled T-J-A-A-T-J-E. And it's actually the Dutch equivalent of charity, so that's what her name meant in Dutch. Of Christopher's siblings, as we said, there were 6, only 2 survived into adulthood. The 2 siblings were his sister Cornelia and his brother Petrus. Christopher's father, Petrus, was a mariner, which was interesting for that time period. We don't know much about his father, but we determined his occupation from a will dated December 7th, 1747, where it mentions Petrus' occupation as a mariner. He passed away 5 years after Christopher was born, so Christopher was a very young child when his dad passed away. He also had a sister, Cornelia. Cornelia later married George Clinton. This made Christopher the brother-in-law to a very influential man in New York. As we know, George Clinton was Ulster County Clerk, Governor of New York, and even Vice President of the United States. So let's look at Christopher and his family. Christopher married Anne Wynkoop, and Anne was born May 11th, 1741. When Anne and Christopher wed on May 9th, 1761, Christopher was 19 and Anne was 20. And they would have 11 children throughout their marriage. Now, interesting thing, I'll list their children's names. They were Maria, Cornelia, Petrus, Johannes, Cornelius, Cornelia, George, Catherine, Anna, Katharina, and Christopher Jr. So as you can see, naming children after family members was very important to them at that time. One of their sons, John Tappen, would become famous locally as a lawyer and editor of the Ulster County Plebeian. And this is where it was published. That's where the newspaper was published, here at the DAR building. Over the course of 23 years, the Tappens had a total of 11 children. They had 6 girls and 5 boys. So where did Christopher Tappen live? Christopher Tappen, well, look here at the picture we have of Christopher Tappen's house. The illustration shown on the left comes from Marius Schoolmaker's History of Kingston, New York. We can tell that it's a 2-story stone house, and the house was located here on the corner of Wall Street and North Front Street in Kingston. The house was demolished about 1868 when a department store was built. So even back in 1868, they were tearing down houses and putting up department stores, and it was built on the same property. From the picture on the right, you can see that Christopher Tappen's house was located where Dominic's Cafe is today, and of course, all of us remember the former famous Fanny Farmer building that was also there. Christopher Tappen's house was also known as the Executive Mansion, and we can all understand probably why. Because whenever George Clinton, the Ulster County Clerk, and the Governor of the state of New York was in Kingston, he would stay at Christopher Tappen's house. Recently, there was a new historical marker put there to commemorate that location as where George Clinton would stay whenever he was in Kingston. Also, it's easy to confuse. There's 2 Tappen houses in Kingston. The one that we just spoke about that formerly existed on North Front Street and Wall Streets, and the house on Crown Street. Christopher Tappen did not live in the Tappen house on Crown Street, next to the parking lot for the courthouse. That house is much smaller than Christopher's house would have been, and is built in a style called New England Saltbox. That house, that now is a home to the restaurant, the Tappen House on Crown Street, was lived in by Cornelius Tappen, who was one of Christopher Tappen's sons. So let's talk a little bit about the county clerk's office and the function of the county clerk's office. There's been a county clerk since 1671, when William Montague was the first person to hold that position. To date, there's been 45 county clerks covering a span of 343 years. As we all know, the clerk's office acts as the keeper of the records. We oversee records dating back to 1658, and these records that we oversee include deeds, mortgages, maps, court records, and many other records. What is important about these records is that they tell a story. These documents, all put together, tell many stories of Ulster County's history. Because of these records, we know how people lived during the early years of Kingston's history, both under the Dutch and under the English, as Ann Gordon spoke about last month. We also know where people once lived through their deeds and the maps that are on file in our office. Christopher Tappen was a link in this chain of record keepers in his role as Deputy County Clerk and later County Clerk. With this in mind, let's move on to talking about Christopher and his role as Deputy County Clerk. Christopher was Deputy County Clerk from 1765 to 1812. When he first started working in the clerk's office, he was 23 years old. Christopher served as a deputy for George Clinton, and George Clinton had been county clerk since 1759. So he was in office, George Clinton was in office about 6 years before Christopher Tappen became his deputy. Mr. Clinton's absence, of course, during the American Revolution, when he was a general, later when he became New York State governor, and finally when he became Vice President of the United States, Christopher Tappen, as the deputy, would administer the office. At this point in time, the county clerk was primarily responsible for filing court documents from the Court of Common Pleas, which at that time was the civil court, and the Court of General Sessions, which was the criminal court. In addition, the county clerk's office has always been responsible for recording land documents, which at that time were primarily deeds, mortgages, and maps. We're going to talk a little bit now about Christopher Tappen's oath of office. And we have that original oath of office, which is quite remarkable, in our archives. And I'm going to read to you his oath because I think the words of his oath are very powerful. And in your handout, there is a copy of the oath. On the front is a copy of the original oath, and on the back of the handout is a transcription of that oath. So please feel free to follow along with me if you like as I read it. I, Christopher Tappen, Deputy Clerk of the Inferior Court of Common Pleas and Deputy Clerk of the Peace and the Court of Sessions of the Peace in and for the County of Ulster, do swear that I will faithfully and honestly, according to the best of my skill and judgment, demean myself in and execute and perform the several offices of the Clerk of the Inferior Court of Common Pleas in and for the said county, and that I have not given or caused to be gave to George Clinton, Esquire, the present Clerk of the Peace, Inferior Court of Common Pleas, and Clerk of the Peace and of the Court of Sessions of the Peace in and for said county of Ulster, nor to any other person or persons whomsoever, any sum or sums of money or any other reward whatsoever, either directly or indirectly, to procure my deputation or appointment to said offices from him, the said George Clinton, and that I will justly, faithfully, and honestly preserve and keep all the records, minutes, papers, writings of what kind soever that doth belong to either or every of the said offices that have or shall hereafter come into my hands and possession, and the same and all and every of them will deliver and yield up to the said George Clinton when he shall require the same of me. So help me God. By these powerful words, Christopher Tappen became Deputy Ulster County Clerk. If we look at the oath, we find Christopher promising to preserve and keep the records that shall come into his hands. This phrase, into my hands, is very powerful. He is promising that whatever may come, and we know that the revolution is coming at this time, he would preserve the records. As we spoke, a link in the chain of those who had gone before him. Christopher would discharge his duties and protect the records. But Christopher's only job was not being the deputy county clerk. He also was a member of the Provincial Congresses. As it got closer and closer to 1776, the year the United States declared its independence from Great Britain, all was not well in the colonies. Families were divided over the issue of whether to stay loyal to Great Britain or to become an independent nation. Since Christopher favored independence from Great Britain, this led to serve in the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Provincial Congresses. At the age of 33, he attended the 1st Provincial Congress. During the 1st Provincial Congress, held in 1775, the delegates signed the Articles of Association. The Articles of Association outlined that the signers promised to support the Continental Congress and whatever actions that the Continental Congress recommended. This was a revolutionary document, and the delegates could be tried for treason just because they signed it. Well, during the 4th Provincial Congress, held in 1776, the delegates, including Christopher Tappen, declared themselves to be the independent state of New York. This decision and the subsequent signing of the Declaration of Independence would draw the newly formed United States of America into a war with one of the most powerful nations at that time, Great Britain. As we all know, starting in 1777, Kingston became the first capital of New York State. This meant that decisions affecting the whole state took place right here in Kingston, New York. This eventually made this town a target for the British. Important records, not only for Kingston, but for the city of New York and the state of New York, were kept and deposited in Kingston for safekeeping. This was done to protect the records from the British, who were getting close to New York City in the early years of the American Revolution. In October 1777, the British, under the command of General Vaughan, started pushing north on the Hudson River from New York City. The British were coming north on the Hudson as part of a two-part attack. General Burgoyne was moving down from Canada, and General Vaughan was moving north. The two were supposed to meet in upstate New York. The British were attempting to cut the newly formed United States in half, separating New England from the other states. At this point, New York had just established an official government, separate from Great Britain, with George Clinton being elected governor. It is interesting to note that Christopher Tappen sent a note to George Clinton on July 7th, 1777, congratulating him on being elected both the governor and lieutenant governor. This letter comes from Old Ulster, an out-of-print publication of the Ulster County Historical Society, Volume 4, from August 1908. And we have to thank our Commissioner Jurors, Paul O'Neill, for bringing this to our attention. In the letter, Tappen states that the results are not official yet because they are still waiting on the polls from Orange County. Tappen ends the letter with a personal note signifying how much Clinton was a member of the Tappen family. And Tappen concludes by saying, "Mother is here and enjoys as good as all my family. I am your dear brother." You can tell that Tappen and Clinton truly did see themselves as brothers, not only in their fight for independence, but as members of one family. By mid-1777, the British were occupying New York City, and marauders were operating throughout the Hudson Valley. Because of these activities, it was necessary to have a committee or council of safety to oversee protection from the British. On October 10th, 1777, the Council of Safety ordered Christopher Tappen and others to remove the important records in their custody to the town of Rochester. And to give you an idea, they loaded the documents into barrels and put them onto wagons. It took 10 wagons in total to transport all the records to the town of Rochester. And calculating that, it would be about 3 days. The records were removed and saved from the burning of Kingston, which happened on October 16, 1777. So they started on October 10th, the Council of Safety. October 16th, we were burned. It took 3 days. So it was very close in time to get the records out of Kingston and to the town of Rochester. The records were removed and saved from the burning of Kingston because of Christopher Tappen's role as Deputy County Clerk and keeper of the records. He saved our history. This history was saved because he promised, as we read in the oath, that whatever came into his hands, he would faithfully preserve. Right here, we're looking at an image from the reenactment of the burning of Kingston in 2000. After the records left Kingston for Rochester, we know they were taken to one of two homes. The records were either taken to the home of Henry Hornback, who lived north of Accord, or to the home of Johannes Hardenberg, who lived south of Accord. In 1778, the records were brought to Marbletown, where the Kingston records were separated from the state records. The state records were then shipped to Poughkeepsie, while the Kingston records were returned to Kingston. We can assume that since Christopher Tappen had been involved in saving the records, that he was also involved in bringing these records back to Kingston. Now, this is the Hardenberg house. And we believe that the records were actually kept in this room right here, this front right room, locked in this room. So what records were saved? What did we save when those wagon loads went out to Rochester? Well, there were things such as tax assessment lists. And what is a tax assessment list? A tax assessment list is a list of people who were living in a town at a given period of time, and it told how much their property was worth. It was also an unofficial census showing us names, both first and last, of the inhabitants. Because censuses were common, tax assessment lists are helpful in determining who once lived in a town. These lists are a great resource for genealogists who are looking for relatives before census were done and were conducted. Now, of course, we save court records, both for civil and criminal courts. These records obviously are helpful in constructing what life was like for people through the years. From these records, we learn what people were buying, what they were paying for, and other various facts about social history. And of course, our land records. These are helpful for knowing who purchased land, who owned it. They're the foundation of our society. In order for us to operate as a civil society, we need to know to whom a piece of property belongs. Also, we need recorded how much is owed on the property and how much was paid for that property. Again, in order to operate, society functions best when records such as mortgages and deeds are recorded in the public record. That way, nothing can ever be changed, and both parties are clear as to the obligations that each must perform. The most important, not the most important, but one of the most important record series that were saved were the Dutch court records. And I will talk about them in a lot more detail as we get further on in the lecture. But these are one of the most significant collections, both nationally as well as internationally. These records document the colonial history of Kingston, starting in 1658 and continuing to 1710. These records tell the story of the Dutch colonial settlers through deeds and court records. All these records matter because these records document our history. Without them, we wouldn't know the decisions that were made in the past and why those decisions were made. So I would like to show you a few examples, and all of these examples exist in our archives today and can be seen by any one of you, of the records that were saved by Christopher Tappen. We will start with the 1770 tax assessment for Kingston. It shows the name of the property owners and how much the property is worth. It gives us a good example of who lived in the area and the value of the property they own. Here at the bottom of the page, we find Christopher's great uncle, Tunis Tappen, with an estate rated at 40 pounds. And next we're going to look at the 1734 tax to build a courthouse and a jail. We're all familiar with these type of taxes, I believe. This document pertains to a tax that the justices of peace were authorized to raise to build a new courthouse and jail. The tax was applied to every town in Ulster County. Each town had to pay a portion of the tax, and this document shows the breakdown of how much each town was paying. We can see that Christopher Tappen's grandfather, who was named after, signed this document. So as we go along, many of relatives to Christopher Tappen are involved in all of our archival holdings. Our next slide will show the 1745 list of officers for Hurley. This document shows the results of an election held in Hurley in 1745. It shows the following offices: town supervisor, assessor, tax collector, constable, overseers of the poor, surveyors of the road, fence viewers, and trustee. And we have many records very similar to this on various towns throughout Ulster County in our collection. Here we can see the fence viewers were Cornelius Newkirk, Johannes Du Bois, and Cornelius Newkirk Jr. And as you can see, many of the offices listed here, such as town supervisor, assessor, tax collector, are all offices that we still have today. This is one of our most valuable documents. It's the 1658 Stockade Bond, and it's dated May 31st, 1658. In this document, Peter Stuyvesant, the Director General of the Colony of New Netherland, orders the inhabitants of Esopus, then the name of Kingston, to abandon their separate dwellings and to congregate on a mutually defensible spot. In this document, it reads, to surround the spot with palisades of a sufficient height. This document gives birth to the stockade, which once encircled all of uptown Kingston. This document is one of the oldest records in the county clerk's archives. It is the first document in the Dutch colonial records collection that we have. It is written in Dutch, and at the turn of the 20th century, this document, as well as the Dutch colonial records collection, was translated by a gentleman hired by the county named Digman Versteeg. Now that we looked at some of the records that we saved, let's go back and see what else Christopher Tappen did throughout his life. One of the things he was very devoted to was furthering education. The document you see on the screen comes from the county clerk's archival collection. The document is dated May 10th, 1775, and it is a payroll receipt for £70 due to James Craig, the teacher at the English school in Kingston, for 1 year's work. The English school was the Kingston Academy. Christopher Tappen was one of the trustees who founded the Kingston Academy. He was also named in the act which created the first Board of Regents at the university in 1784. As you can see, he cared very much about education. And what other roles did Christopher Tappen hold in Ulster County government? This was one I didn't realize, but he was the county treasurer. And the county treasurer at this time was not an elected position. Rather, the county treasurer was appointed by the Ulster County Board of Supervisors. As we know, each town had a supervisor who oversaw matters pertaining to the town. In addition, all the town supervisors would gather together as the Ulster County Board of Supervisors to make decisions about the county as a whole. The Ulster County Board of Supervisors would eventually become the Ulster County Legislature in the 1960s. At the age of approximately 39, Christopher was appointed Ulster County Treasurer. He held that office until 1793 at the age of approximately 51. So from 1781 to 1793, he was our Ulster County Treasurer. And as the Ulster County Treasurer, what his duties involved would be that the Board of Supervisors would appoint assessors for each town. So the Board of Supervisors had quite a bit of appointment ability. The assessors would write up their list of values. This was known as the assessment roll. The Board of Supervisors would examine it and check it for any errors. 2 copies were then made. One went to the tax collector to collect the tax for each town, and the other went to the county treasurer. The county treasurer was responsible for the monies that came in from each town. Some monies went to the state, some went to the county, and some went to individuals. He was required to keep accounts of what was paid out and to whom. Now here is the minutes of the Board of Supervisors, 1793, and it's showing the treasurer's accounts. These are accounts showing what individuals were due to be paid from the county treasury. On this account, we find expenses for individuals traveling on county business, carrying ballots, making the tax lists, and making repairs to the courthouse. This is an example of the accounts that Christopher Tappen would have managed. So now let's move on to Christopher Tappen's time in New York State government. He was very busy in county government, but he also held roles in New York State government. At the age of 46, he was elected to the New York State Assembly in 1788. He held that office for 1 term until 1790, when he was 48 years old. 7 years later, at the age of 55, in 1797, Christopher was elected to the New York State Senate, representing the Middle District. At this point in time, there were 4 Senate districts in New York State: the Southern, Middle, Eastern, and Western. Today we have 63 New York State senatorial districts. In the collections of the New York State Archives, we found a certificate of election showing Christopher's election to the Senate in 1797, and they were gracious enough to make a copy of this for us. This document here from 1797 shows the results of the New York State elections from that year. The Office of the Secretary of State of New York indicates that the individuals listed in this document have been elected senators for the 4 New York senatorial districts. On the first page, we find Christopher Tappen's name, along with 2 other individuals representing the Middle District in the New York State Senate. Now, let's move on to his last position that he held in county government, and that was as Ulster County Clerk from 1812 to 1821. He was appointed at the age of 70 after the death of George Clinton. At this time, county clerks were appointed by a board of senators in Albany called the Council of Appointment. The council made the decision to ask Christopher Tappen to become Ulster County Clerk upon the death of George Clinton. When Christopher Tappen accepted the position, he became the 13th Ulster County Clerk. One of the most important documented tasks that was handled by Christopher Tappen involves the records of the trustees of Kingston. In 1816, the Corporation of the Freeholders and the Commonalty of Kingston was dissolving. The Kingston Patent in 1687 established the Corporation of the Freeholders and the Commonalty of Kingston and provided a vast tract of land called Kingston Commons for public use. Any of you that come into our office realize that we still have the Kingston Common maps. The corporation was administered by trustees who created many records during the life of the corporation from 1688 to 1816. After the Revolution, the formal organization of towns was changed by the New York State Legislature. By 1816, the Corporation of Kingston had drawn to a close and was replaced with the Village of Kingston, managed by a board of directors. Upon the dissolution, the trustees sold all their records, deeds, books, minute books, minutes of the town court of Kingston, for $1 to the Ulster County Clerk. And these trustee records are researched all the time in our office, and we never realized that Christopher Tappen was instrumental in bringing them into the clerk's office. So here we're looking at the conveyance, the transfer of those records to the county clerk. The trustees recognized the important role that the county clerk provided in preserving history and caring for the records, which is why they sold the records to the county clerk. In this conveyance, the trustees sold the books, minutes, and papers, and they provided an interesting note. The trustees said, on the condition that the said maps, records, and papers shall be permanently deposited in the clerk's office of said county for the use of the inhabitants. That is each and every one of us, past, present, and future. So if you look up on the screen, you will see the conveyance showing the transfer of records from the trustees to the county clerk's office. To this day, as I said, we still have those records in our office, and anyone from any walk of life can walk in and see those records at any time. Next, we're going to look at a list of all the county clerks who have served Ulster County. To date, there have been 45 county clerks, and on this list, we can see Christopher Tappen's name highlighted in red. He was number 13. Before 1816, the county clerk's office may have either been in the courthouse or perhaps in Christopher Tappen's house. We don't know for certain. From 1816 to 1818, we believe Christopher Tappen had the records at his home. In 1818 until 1845, the county clerk's office was located in the courthouse. From Marius Schoolmaker's History of Kingston, we learned that when they built the new courthouse in 1818, it was desired to construct a fire-proof county clerk's office. No doubt the events surrounding the burning of Kingston in 1777 were still fresh in the minds of individuals, and particularly Christopher Tappen. Christopher Tappen was the last appointed county clerk. From 1777 until 1821, county clerks were appointed by the Council of Appointment. The Council of Appointment was made up of 4 senators from the legislature. The Council of Appointment would meet with the governor and lieutenant governor to make various appointments. In 1821, Jacob Snyder, right here, right after Christopher Tappen, became the first county clerk to be elected and not appointed to the position. Christopher retired from the position of county clerk for health reasons in 1821 at the age of 79. Upon his retirement, he had worked in the county clerk's office for 56 years. Very long time, and in between he held various positions. Christopher Tappen died on August 3rd, 1826, 5 years after he left the county clerk's office at the age of 84. He left us a legacy, a very important legacy that we continue to benefit from today. First, in the spirit of his oath, which we see here, we continue to preserve all the records that we have and make them accessible to the public. As links in the chain that goes all the way back to 1671, we continue to be the record keepers who keep the stories for Ulster County citizens. Second, by saving the early records of Ulster County, Christopher Tappen gave a gift to each of us, past, present, and future. The gift was the invaluable resource of having these early records available for research. And as I mentioned before, we're going to talk a little bit now about the Dutch records. And this is a group of records he saved because of his dedication and planning. These records were written in Old Dutch, began in 1658, and they ended about 1710. They are the most important and significant records, not only in the state of New York, but also have international significance. Let me give you a little background about these records and the journey that they took that ended them up in the Ulster County Clerk's office. Well, they started with us in 1686 in the County Clerk's office. And in those records, there was a stray entry made in 1759, which states, September 1759. This is the Dutch book delivered by Mrs. Crook, widow, given to George Clinton, Clerk of Ulster County, before me, signed Cornelius Hornbeck. John Crook had been the previous county clerk, and upon his death, the Dutch records, and presumably other records as well, were given into the care of the succeeding county clerk, George Clinton, as we believe they kept their records in their homes at that time when they were the county clerk. However, as time went on, fewer and fewer people could read the Old Dutch. So in 1855, the Dutch records went missing after being officially sent out for translation. The scholar who was supposed to translate them into English fell ill and died. The Dutch records were assimilated into the scholar's papers. For many years, no one knew what happened to them. They were assumed to be lost forever. Well, in June 1895, a mysterious package was delivered to the county clerk, who at that time was George S. Slate. Contained inside that package were the Dutch records, carefully wrapped and preserved. There was no return address, and the only clue was the package was sent from somewhere on Long Island. However, the records were still in Dutch, and even fewer people could read them. So in 1896, Ulster County hired a Dutch scholar named Digman Versteeg to translate them into English. It took Digman 2 years to translate the Dutch records. In 1899, he completed the project and delivered 3 volumes of translations to the county clerk's office, which we still have today. So what has the modern-day county clerk's office done with these records? Well, in 2007, we began a data entering project, entering the English translations into a word-searchable database in order to make them more accessible to researchers. Then the data entry was proofread to ensure accuracy. In 2009, as part of the 400th anniversary of Henry Hudson discovering the Hudson River, we unveiled a new website where the English translations of the Dutch records can be searched by keyword. One of the reasons this was done was to serve the people and to continue to make the records accessible to everyone. Now, for the first time in history, the English translations are accessible for everybody to search by keyword, date, parties involved in the action, as well as by book and page. And I urge you to go on our website. This is just one of many collections that you can search on our database, on our web archive, our archival website. So please take advantage of it and just use it whenever you feel like you want to do some research or are interested in looking at different collections. It really is amazing. Now, one example from the Dutch records of particular importance is an inventory for a man named Gijsberg van Embrock. The inventory of his effects was completed September 2nd, 1665, and this is the inventory that you see up here on the screen. It was just a few days after he had died. His inventory was one of the most extensive lists we have of the possessions someone from the 1660s would have owned, and it's 12 pages long. On the screen, you can see the first page and the last page of the inventory as they appear in Dutch. A particular interest from his inventory is the list of his books. Gijsberg had one of the most extensive libraries of anyone in the New World at this time. He had over 50 individual titles, and in some cases, dozens of a few particular titles. Thanks to Christopher Tappen's efforts to save the early records during the Burning of Kingston, this inventory was spared by the British torch. Gijsberg van Embrock was the first recorded owner of what would later become the Matthews Pearson House. At one point in time, all the possessions that were found in this inventory were contained in his house. On the left of this picture is what the house would have looked like back in his time. The right is an interior picture of where Geisberg would have lived. The Matthews Person House would stay a private residence until the County of Ulster bought the building in 1914. After 1914, it became office space for various county offices. In 1999, after discovering that the building was unstable, workers were moved out, and an historic structure report was commissioned as a part of the stabilization efforts. Many historic features were uncovered, and the decision was made to turn the house into a museum. In 2010, the Ulster County Clerk's Office began managing and administrating the Person House. For the last 5 years, we've staffed the house with high school and college students. The picture on the screen shows the house as it appears to us today. Some interesting facts. Over the course of 5 years, we have had 10,000 people walk through the Person House from 46 states. We'll work on the other 4 states. We'll let you know what states they are. We can get someone there from there. And we have 27 different countries that have been represented as visitors pass through the Person House. Our exhibit this year is called People of Person, Discovering the Van Embrocks. This exhibit invites the reader to follow along in the journey to discover more about the first owners of the Person House, the Van Embrock family. Also this season, we have the returning exhibit, Round Out Revisited, which is provided by the Rear Center for Immigrant Culture and History. We also have different cultural and historical groups volunteered at the Person House throughout the season. There's still 2 months left. We're open till November 22nd, so please visit the house if you have not been there before. We're open every Saturday from 10 to 2. Okay, let's look a little bit at the overview of services that Christopher Tappen has given us throughout the years. Some of his offices have overlapped. He's held various offices. Born in 1742 in Kingston, New York. He was married at the age of 19 to Anne Winecoop. He held the office of Deputy Ulster County Clerk from age 23 to age 70, 1765 to 1812. He was a member of the Provincial Congress from age 33 and 34. He was also the Ulster County Treasurer, and he held that position for approximately 12 years until he was 51 years of age. He was a one-term New York State Assemblyman. He was a one-term New York State Senator, and he was our Ulster County Clerk from age 70 to age 79, from 1812 to 1821. At the age of 84, 5 years after holding office, Ulster County Clerk, he died in 1826. He certainly accomplished many things in his life. We're going to reach out to each and every one of you because there's one thing that we don't have of Christopher Tappen, and that is a picture or an image of him. If any one of you know of a drawing, an illustration, or a painting, please let us know. All our contact information is in the packet. We would love to have a picture of Christopher Tappen. Also, please feel free to visit our Archives Gallery. It's located on the 2nd floor of the Ulster County Office Building. The current exhibit that's on display there is called The Thanks of a Nation. We honor and remember Ulster County Civil War veterans. This exhibit shows the 74 discharge papers of Civil War veterans that we have in our collections. The discharge give details about where the soldier was from, a physical description, and sometimes where they served. In effect, these discharges paint us a picture of what these soldiers once looked like. You can view it any time between the hours of 9 and 5, Monday through Friday, on the 2nd floor of the county office building. And of course, feel free to visit the Person House. As I said, we're open Saturdays from 10 to 2. And I would just like to briefly go over in the handout what you'll see in your packet. There's a pamphlet that shows the various services that the county clerk's office has to offer. There's also my card, which is directly to my office that you can call anytime. Behind the first item, you'll see in your packet also a pamphlet entitled Genealogical and Other Resources of the Ulster County Archives. This brochure shows you some of the record series that you could research while you're doing your genealogy. Next, you will see a brochure of the Person House, and this will tell you a little about the history of the house and what is available to view and see. Next is a schedule of the Person House. And again, we have 2 months left in the season, so please, there's many things going on. Feel free to visit. And then behind that is information in regard to our Old Dutch records online and the ability to access them. And also our Civil War exhibit that's on display in the Ulster County Office Building. I just would like to conclude in saying Christopher Tappen was a man who had immense influence in shaping Kingston, Ulster County, and the state of New York. Through this lecture, we've been able to tell his story and to celebrate his many accomplishments. It is my hope that you have learned as much about Christopher Tappen as I have, and that now we can all pay tribute to this local founding father. Ulster County clerks, including Christopher Tappen, have cared for our record for 343 years. Thanks to their due diligence, we can still benefit from these important historical documents today and for generations to come. I'd like to thank Paul O'Neill for inviting me to come this evening. I'd like to thank all of you very much for making me part of the Buried Treasure Lecture Series. It's been an honor and privilege to be here this month. Thank you so much.
Nina, thank you so much. And as we see, there's in that list of county clerks, we've had a lot of county clerks. Some have been better than others. Christopher Tappen was an exceptional county clerk. Nina Postupack is just as exceptional. So again, Nina, thank you so much. Now, and as I promised, does anybody have any questions for Nina on Christopher Tappen? Did I see someone? Where's he buried?
Well, that's a great question, the Old Dutch Church, we believe he's buried in. And Paul and I have discussed this in detail because the records, the records reflect that he has been buried there, but there's not a gravestone there showing where he is buried. So we are doing some research on that. And I have to add one more thing. If Nancy Shando could please stand up, because Nancy Shando is related through marriage to Christopher Tappen. Her fifth great-grandfather married Christopher Tappen's aunt. Am I correct there? Yes, and her name was?
Mary T. Tappen.
Mary T. Tappen.
So my many times great-grandmother was Mary T. Tappen, and Petrus was her nephew, and so Christopher would have been her. Oh. Mary T. Tappen was the aunt of Christopher Tappen, and she was my many times grandmother. So I got to join the Daughters of the American Revolution because of the genealogy I was able to do with the records of Kingston and the Dutch Church, and I found out that my revolutionary soldier was Christopher Tappen's cousin. And the family name was Hotelling, that Mary T. Tappen married into. So the Hotellings have a large presence in Kingston even yet today. And if you know any Hotellings, they're probably related to Christopher Tappen, and they may not know it, so you can tell them.
Thank you, Nancy.
And so until we do find a picture of Christopher Tappen, you'll have to look at Nancy, and then you can see that Christopher Tappen was very attractive.
Didn't he die in Albany?
Well, I don't think so. I don't know. Paul, do you have any knowledge of that?
Where do you find the information that he may be buried at Old Dutch?
We found it in the burial records of the Old Dutch Church. So he's listed in the burial records, but there's no gravestone. Yes, in the Old Dutch Church.
It's very interesting because Christopher Tappen, we really can't emphasize enough how important he was. During the, between April 20th, 1777, when the New York State Constitution was passed, and July 30th, 1777, when George Clinton is sworn in as first governor of New York, there's effectively no government. And what happens is the Constitutional Convention appoints a council of safety of 15 people. Now, among these people are, Robert Livingston, John Jay. These are really our founding fathers. In that 15 is Christopher Tappen. He was not only a huge figure here, he was a huge figure nationally, incredibly important. And he is listed in the records, the burial records of the Old Dutch Church, as being buried there. But it's absolutely mind-boggling to me that we don't know where he is. Inside the Old Dutch Church, as we learned in the Old Dutch Church lecture, when the current Old Dutch Church was built in 1852, it was actually built over a number of graves. I think there's 82 graves underneath there. And they moved the stones out, and when you walk around, you'll see on the back of some of the stones an X. Any tombstone in the Old Dutch cemetery that has an X in the back is somebody who is buried, actually buried underneath the church. They did not move the bodies. But a lot of them, Wessel Tenbrook, who was the builder of the Senate House, was under there, and they've put there's a marble plaque inside. So some of them more memorable people, they've put plaques inside stating that they're buried underneath the church. Christopher Tappen doesn't have that, and this is really, and Nina and I have discussed this, and we really do want to figure out where he is, even if he is under there, to be able to commemorate him somehow, because, again, this is a huge, huge figure. Christopher Tappen, along with James Clinton, George Clinton's brother, was the one delegated to go down and find out the place on the Hudson River in the Highlands that would be the appropriate place for a fort and to put a chain across the water. Again, the strategy for the British during the Revolutionary War was if they could cut New York in half, they've effectively cut New England from the rest of the country, and they would win the war, and they would have. That was stopped in Saratoga. Christopher Tappen and James Clinton were the ones sent to determine where would be the best place to stop them. This is a huge, huge task. They actually picked the place where Fort Constitution was built, correct, Ted? And Ed?
No, down by Fair Mountain was the one that was selected first.
Yeah, and it wasn't where...
The ultimate solution for the West Point crossing.
Yeah, where Fort Clinton came, that wasn't where they picked. They picked a different place. But ultimately where West Point was in that area. So West Point was put there as the most strategic place. That was picked by Christopher Tappen and James Clinton. So incredibly important, and it really is an issue. I'm not aware where he actually died. I thought he had died here, but it's possible. He was...
But you know, when they electrified the church, they tunneled through there, and all those graves were disturbed, so they're not many bodies under there.
I'm sorry. I don't know where they were. And to think of a building that big, that's foundation wasn't deep enough to disturb the graves, which you would think of 6 feet, is amazing. And that's kind of, I believe, what led to the problem with the Old Dutch for some time. It had braces on the side because there wasn't enough support for the weight of the building. But again, this is really something that we really need to do. Christopher Tappen, tonight was really the first step to recognizing someone who has deserved this recognition for so long. When we started this lecture series, Christopher Tappen was really one of the people that we decided to have this for. He appears everywhere, but some of the history is scant. So Nina and her staff, Alice and Ian and Lori, have done such an incredible amount of research, and it's just so appropriate that we are recognizing him. And it's even more appropriate that Nina is the one doing it, because as I said, you know, Christopher Tappen saved the records, but if they're saved, we don't know what they are. They're not made available. They're as useless as if they don't exist. And I've told it, I think, many times during this series. I had ran into Nina once, and was asked, we were talking about the wampum belt, which Nina was kind enough to bring to Ed Ford's dedication event. And we were talking about it, and Nina said, yeah, we have that at the clerk's office. And I said, wow, can I see it? And I had just been appointed commissioner of jurors. She said, yeah. So I'm thinking, oh, this is great. Look at this. I get this position. Look at this power I have. But you know what Nina said? She said, no, we'll show it to anybody. And that's absolutely true. She will show these records to anybody. As Nina told me that night, she said, those records are our records. They don't belong to me, to our office. They belong to you. and she has done everything she can to make them available, and she has done more to foster our history and our legacy than anyone I can think of. I look back at the history of our county and our community, which is so rich, and the two people that are most responsible for us being here tonight are Christopher Tappen and Nina Postupack.
Is there any connection with the Tappan Zee Bridge and Christopher Tappen?
I don't believe that there is. I have asked that, and Tappen also, I believe that there's an Indian word or a location, but I had asked the same thing, and I had been told at some point along the line that it has no relation. But Christopher Tappen was related to the Livingston family. Robert Livingston from Claremont, incredibly important individual, was a relative. So when, one of the things that interests me was when the Constitutional Convention met here in 1777, I thought, where did these people stay? The John Jays, the Robert Livingstons. I believe that Robert Livingston certainly stayed at the Tappen House. John Jay was also related by marriage to the Livingston. He may well have stayed there. I think that it's said that he stayed at the Senate House, but I would think that Christopher Tappen's house was really the stopping point for every person of stature that came through this community during that time. And when we think of, all right, well, these great records, who would ever throw them out? Well, you'd be surprised. The old Dutch West India records were sold for copy paper. It's so easy to lose these things, and so many places have. Because of Christopher Tappen, we have those. Our first record, our document number 1, is that the stockade bond, which Nina allowed to be bought here for the talk. We all got to see it. It's amazing. So again, it's so important that we have these. And as Nina alluded to, the assessment, you think assessment rolls, who cares? Well, the assessment rolls tells you who was living here, where they lived at times, what they did, and how much money they had. You get to see who were the people in power, who were, what people did, what their lives are like. These records tell you what a movie would tell us now. So they are so important. And again, the importance of saving these, and more importantly now, by making them available to all of us, it can't be overemphasized.
Paul brings up a very good point, and I just want to give you a perfect example. We have a donation program in the Ulster County Clerk's office where you can give back if you find something that belonged to the county and somehow found its way out of the county back to us. And to give you a perfect example, which is amazing, the Board of Supervisors minutes. We have every Board of Supervisors minutes from the beginning of their creation right until the legislature took over. There was a segment that was missing from the Board of Supervisors minutes. When Judge Davis, Arthur Davis, passed away, his family found those minutes in his collection and donated them back to Ulster County and to the county clerk's office. So now we have a complete set of the Board of Supervisors minutes from the 1700s all the way through to present. So Paul is right. They're in attics, they're in basements, they're in people's sheds, garages. It's amazing. And people do not see the value of those records. So we tried to get the word out. Please, if you could also, there is a donation program that they can give back. We will recognize the individuals that give it back to us, because many times people don't want to give them up either. But they're preserved and they're in good hands. And so hopefully, as we become more aware of these documents that are out there, we'll bring them back to their homes.
Yeah, the archive.
The great-grandfather of Julia McEntee Dillon.
The question was Christopher Tappen the great-grandfather of Julia McEntee Dillon? I'm not aware of that, that he is.
Yeah,
well,
that could be.
He may, yeah.
I'll send you.
Okay, great.
We believe you.
Excuse me, Nina, could you briefly describe how these records are preserved?
Oh, sure. As people know, on Vauxhall Avenue here in Kingston, we have the Ulster County Record Center. And the Record Center has an archival vault. It's temperature and humidity controlled. The lighting is special for archival documents. Our fire suppression system is made for an archival vault. It's a building within a building. We have the cement block, which is, I believe, 8 inches thick, and it's built within the Ulster County Hall of Records. So they're preserved in temperature, environmental, and humidity controls. And in addition to that, everything is wrapped in archival paper, archival tissue. Nothing is touched unless they have white gloves on. So everything is really preserved so that for years and thousands of years to come, hopefully, people can still access those records. Well, we hope, right?
And it's amazing. It's set up so that if there was a fire, the air gets sucked out of the building. So water doesn't come out or chemicals or anything. It sucks the air out to protect the records. So it's an amazing place, but it gives us a central location to store all these. Again, people do. They clean out basements and, they throw stuff out if they don't know. If you ever encounter or you run into somebody who has documents, they don't know what it is, have them bring it to the county clerk's office. Maybe it is nothing, but once these documents are gone, they can never be brought back. So it is amazing.
Why is George Clinton listed twice in the list of county clerks?
He was listed twice, and I wonder if it's
Was there a break or?
Yeah,
Can you pull that up?
I wonder if it's prior to independence and after.
No, it's 1759 and 1760 are the dates.
Yeah, he was actually appointed. When he was appointed, it wasn't known as the county clerk. It was clerk of the Court of Common Pleas. He actually was appointed when he was 9 years old, I believe. And what had happened? Yeah, here is 1759 to 1760. He was actually appointed. His father was a surveyor as well. His father had done some surveying work out what was known as the frontiers then. It would be Western New York now. And as a thank you, the governor had offered him the position, I believe, of sheriff of New York City. Is that correct, Ed? But he didn't want that, and he asked that, why don't you appoint my son to something? They appointed George Clinton, clerk of the Court of Common Pleas, when he was 9 years old. Now, the position didn't take effect until the prior clerk died. When he did die, and George Clinton was 19 at the time, I believe, he took over that role. But in reality, George Clinton was Ulster County Clerk for 53 years, I believe. But during that time, the reality of the situation is Christopher Tappen was the one who ran the county clerk's office. As I've said before, it might be possible that George Clinton might not even known where the office was. But Christopher Tappen was really the one who ran it. I don't know why that is, and it might be that was a change in terminology from clerk of the Court of Common Pleas. I don't believe so, so I don't know, Frank. It is a very good question.
We'll have to research that.
Yeah, but and one of the great things is learning things here from you. I certainly don't know anything. When I don't know it, I usually tell, as I've said before, that Ed Ford told me, and people take it as gospel truth. But half the time, I'm just making it up. Any other questions? No? Well, again, Nina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Can I see that? Okay. Oh, before everybody goes, hold on. The show's not over. As always, one of the things I do want to, we talk about trying to find, I did something, I guess, and just changed that. I'm sorry, Joe, crooked. But when we talk about trying to find pictures of some of these people, it's amazing that some people who were of such huge stature, we can't find their pictures. One of them was this man, Charles DeWitt. DeWitt Mills Road, the DeWitt Mill was his. He was an incredibly important person. Second to George Clinton during the pre-Revolutionary War era and during the Revolutionary War era, Charles DeWitt would be the most famous person. And I couldn't believe that we couldn't find a picture of him. At the courthouse, we're displaying a copy of the first printing of the New York State Constitution. The only local member of the Constitution, the committee to write the Constitution in the courthouse, was Charles DeWitt. So I tried very hard to find a picture from him, and I couldn't anywhere. I recently found this picture. I had to go back to his third grade class. It looks like, a third or fourth grader made it, but, there's pictures out there. There's pictures out there of these people, and you may find it. I find it very hard to believe that Christopher Tappen never had a portrait made of him. It's probably sitting somewhere in an antique store listed as unknown gentleman. But keep an eye out, because you can find these things, and it would be absolutely wonderful for us to have a portrait of him and displayed prominently in the county clerk's office. Because like I said, I really think he and Nina are the two most important people in the history, preserving our history.
Where did you find that one?
I found that one in, as a sketch in Old Ulster magazine. It was a magazine printed from, I believe, 1905 to 1911. Absolutely wonderful magazine, but it found sketches. But I also had found, when I read the organizational minutes of the Ulster County Historical Society from 1858 or 1859. And it was started by George Pratt, Abraham Broom Hasbrook, George Sharp. And when they started, they asked, much like we're doing now, people, if you have historical records, please bring them in. And people brought in unbelievable things, and they list them. Unfortunately, we've lost most of these. There were two portraits of Charles DeWitt. This, I do not believe, was one of them. I believe they were actual portraits. We've lost them. So things are out there, and you may find them. And we ask the people who are historically minded and who appreciate our special history here to help out. It would be great to be able to pass this on to the next generation. So, as Nina said, the call is out. If you find it, let us know. First of all, I cannot thank Nina enough. This is really, Christopher Tappen is somebody who deserves recognition. This is probably one of the most difficult subjects to research. His name appears everywhere. I don't think anybody signed more documents in our county records than Christopher Tappen. But we know, you always find that he's involved with this, he's part of this committee, but we didn't know that much about him. The research that Nina and their staff did really has been exceptional. So we can't thank them enough. I think we do have to give them another round of applause. We do, again, as always, we want to thank everybody who makes this possible. I used to say everybody's name. It really got too long, and this list continues to grow each and every day. So we do want to thank everybody who makes this possible, and we want to thank all of you. You make this possible. Without you, we couldn't do this. We want to thank you for making this lecture series possible. We also want to take another opportunity to thank everybody who made Ed Ford's Lunette dedication ceremony possible. Everybody, many people here gave of your time, your money. Hugh started us off with an article. Joe did so much. Nina keeps popping up everywhere. You have a community event. Joe Tantillo. We had Bob Rizzo. It was a wonderful event, and I believe that we have something special to give to Ed tonight. Phyllis McCabe is here, and I'll ask Phyllis if she can come on up.
Hi. 2 Saturdays ago was a wonderful day for Kingston. Ed Ford was honored with a dedicated lunette at City Hall called a peace offering. And there were many dignitaries there, including Paul and Nina, and it was just a great day. And I captured it with my camera, and I just wanted to present this book that I made for Ed that he'll have as a remembrance.
Thank you so much to everybody who was there, or even if you couldn't be there, you heard about it. I was duly honored to have all that presentation, and amazed that 200 people showed up. So thank you again, everybody that did so much.
Thank you. Phyllis, thank you for doing that. Thank you for all that you do, and what a great way to honor Ed. It was a wonderful ceremony. I do want to end by telling you what is coming up. Unfortunately, I'll have to borrow somebody's flyer if they have it. I promise I'll give it back. Does anybody have a flyer? Andy? Thank you very much. I apologize. I knew what they were. I just wanted to give you the official title. Next month, on October 17th, very appropriate, the day after the burning of Kingston, we are going to have the presentation of the Burning of Kingston, The Phoenix Rises, by Hank Yost, who was a member of the first Ulster militia reenactors. He's going to come here all dressed up. He's going to bring some of the weaponry, and he's going to talk about the burning of Kingston. And it really is the Phoenix Rises. Kingston did, in a very short period of time, come from complete devastation back to really one of the premier places, not only in New York State, but the United States. And then on November 21st, we have the Senate House, Cradle of Democracy, and that's going to be by Tom Kernan, or it might be by Dina Preston, he might have told me, but either Tom or Dina from the Senate House is going to be doing that. And, you know, what a great way. We've been here for more than 2 years. They have bent over backwards for us to make this such a special place. So I think we're due to learn a little bit more about the Senate House. So again, Nina, thank you. Phyllis, thank you so much. And thank all of you. Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next month.